The enskinment was done Thursday morning by the king of the Mamprugu traditional area, of which Bawku is said to be part, now Bawku Abdullahi Mahamud Sheriga, together with his royal court members. It started with the arrival of the families and sympathizers of the 4 Mamprugu Gate in Bawku. Soon, scores of people in around Nalirgu began to gather at the palace to witness the historic enskinment of a Bawku Naba by a Mamprugu overlord after nearly 40 years. However, while the processes were ongoing, members of the Northeast Regional Security Council, led by the Regional Minister Yidana Zakari, arrived at the palace in the company of heavily armed security forces. The presence of the Regional Minister briefly halted the process as the crowd erupted in opposition against his presence and demanded that he leave the place. After a brief opposition from the crowd, Mr. Yidana, following the intervention of the palace elders, was allowed to engage the overlord in a short private conversation. Whilst on his way out after the meeting with the overlord, the crowd began to hoot at him and his delegation. A palace elder later told Joy News that the minister had come to accompany the overlord to Accra upon the invitation of President Nana Akufo-Addo. The elder added that the overlord turned down the invitation and told the minister it was too late to stop the enskinment. The enskinment processes then resumed and soon ended with the announcement of Na Seydou Abagari, with a chieftaincy titled Na Akuluga II as the new chief of the Bawku Paramount Skin. Speaking to Joy News, some of the residents believe this enskinment would ensure the return of peace in Bawku.
The ban has never solved any problem. Bans have killed many people. We have seen many deaths, we have seen many naming, we have seen many properties and lives destroyed. It has to stop. The youth, I am a young man and I feel very bad. Every time I see pictures of Musasi youth being killed, as somebody who is a parent, I feel very much aggrieved. I am not happy.
There is nothing like a Supreme Court ruling. So indeed, what the Nigeria has done today is the best thing to do. Indeed, this is a stepping stone to a resolution of the conflict or crisis in Bawku. I would want to entreat politicians to respect the chieftaincy institution. So the government should rather pay attention or concentrate on how to ensure that lives and property are not lost there. But as for taking the chief home, in fact, the chief will soon be home. There is nobody on earth that will be able to stop the legitimate Bawku Naba from getting to Bawku.
I expect everything to return to normal as usual. We've had it before during the era of Dr. Kwame Nkrumah, Ghana's first president. He created this thing in the first place. But after the overthrow of Nkrumah in 1966, the then Nayiri, the 30th king of Bawku, Nabongo Adam Badimso, and Skin Na Tampura Adam Zanjo as the 14th Bawku Naba. And you can go and check the history. Bawku returned to normalcy. Everything was moving on smoothly until the demise of the 14th Bawku Naba, Na Tampura Adam Zanjo, before we had what we were having. So we are optimistic that everything will return to normalcy after this enskinment.
So everybody in Mamprugu, Upper East, in Northeast, we are happy to see such a thing. For Nayiri to skin Bawku Naba, because all that place is for Yawa.
The new chief is a popular retired educationist whose grandfather was the 12th Bawku Naba. He was unanimously approved by the crowd as they burst into loud cheers amidst drumming and dancing. The new chief, Na Akuluga II, called for an end to all hostilities in Bawku.
Finally, the Bawku program that has existed for almost half a century.
Elias Sutanko reporting from Nalirgu for Joy News.
We are pleasantly happy that they have issued a statement condemning the act, but that's not enough. It is not enough to condemn the act. It should go further than that and make sure that the fellow doesn't act as a chief. That is important. Not words alone, but action, by government. There cannot be a rival chief in Bawku. There is one chief recognized by law, and that should be respected by everybody under this constitutional dispensation. So government should not just say that we condemn it, but make sure it doesn't work. No rival chief exists in Bawku. That cannot be tolerated. I'm very much surprised that this incident could not be nipped in the bud, that it could have been prevented. You all know that prevention is better than cure. I think that they have enough intelligence on the ground to have averted, to have informed government to avert this development. It is unfortunate that it wasn't averted, but we are still confident that the government of the day will make sure that there is no rival chief in Bawku. Yes, we are pleasantly happy that they have issued a statement condemning the act, but it's not enough. It is not enough to condemn the act. It should go further than that and make sure that the fellow doesn't act as a chief. That is important. Not words alone, but action by government. There cannot be a rival chief in Bawku. There is one chief recognized by law, and that should be respected by everybody under this constitutional dispensation. So government should not just say that we condemn it, but make sure it doesn't work.
And that is the situation we're discussing this morning as our arrow issue, the Bawku development, that installment of a new chief that has left a lot of tongues wagging. Well, joining us for that conversation, we have a number of guests. We'll be starting with Mahama Yariga, Member of Parliament for Bawku Central, who joins the conversation, together with Colonel Festus Abwaje, retired conflict and security analyst. I'll start with you, Colonel Abwaje. When you look at the developments in Bawku and the recent sparks that have flown, I was just reading a bit about some of the antecedents to what we see all the way from 1978. We know this conflict has been premised on rights to allodial land on the one end, and then chieftaincy on the other end. In this instance, it is chieftaincy that has come to play. But what do you make of the Bawku situation, past and present? You would have to unmute, sir.
Sorry, please. First of all, good morning, and thanks for having me.
Good morning.
To really place the Bawku conflict into context, you even need to go further back into history. The 1900s, at least, when the British found a way to execute, orchestrate their indirect rule through chiefs and kings and so on. In that context, 1931-32 were quite crucial, because there were two conferences that were held, the Kusasi Conference 1931 and Mamprusi Conference 1932. The literature that I've come across showed that the British used these conferences to orchestrate the establishment of chiefship, that's a Bawku chiefship, and the Bawku Naba and the head of Kusasis as a term to cover everybody who was in the Bawku area. And that brings us all the way to the time of independence when a commission was set up. I've come across the name of Lord Listowel, but that commission decided that the Bawku Naba was a Kusasi and head of the Mamprusi. Now, that was a decision which was reversed by NLC decree, I think 112. So that NLC decree annulled the decision of the commission that had been set up, and then put in place a Mamprusi as Bawku Naba. Now, that status quo prevailed until the PNDC era, when PNDC law 75, I think 1983, also annulled the decisions of the NLC, and indeed virtually restored the Mamprusi who had been, diskinned. And that was the time when the incumbent Bawku Naba the Naba Asigri Abugrago Azoka II, sat on the scheme. So he has been on the scheme from 1984 thereabout until now. He's still alive, he's on the scheme. But in between, attempts were made to restore Mamprosis to the skin of Bawku. And one of the critical timelines was about 2003, when the case ended up in the Supreme Court upon a writ that had been filed by Mamprosi lawyers. I've been told through telephone conversations that indeed the lawyer who presented the writ or represented the Mamprosi came from the chambers of the incumbent president. Supreme Court emphatically dismissed the writ. Actually, the writ had been withdrawn, but dismissed the writ, and that was even an appeal court, I should think. So there had been this dicey situation, representations to, let's say, the former president, Kufuor, and the incumbent president, all of which seem not to have worked. The big question now is, why is all of this happening? That in the long history of this conflict, it is only now that there are two centers of traditional authority in Bawku. Why is it happening this time? The timing is quite critical. And that puts into context the empirical evidence that the Kusasis are pro-NDC, Mamprosis are pro-NPP. In other words, the conflict has some political undertones. Say it. So when you read the press statement that was issued yesterday, one could legitimately ask, did the government do enough? Do you go to any palace in this country on the day that an installment or enskinment is supposed to take place in order to prevent it? I stand to think that the government had intelligence that this enskinment was going to take place and should have preempted it, not on the day yesterday, but well before that. Yesterday was too late. And now we are confronted with a situation of pouring more fuel into the flame in Bawku. To stop this Alhaji Seydou Abagri from parading himself in public as a Bawku Naba is going to be a daunting task. More difficult than if the government had used all the avenues at its disposal to try and stop the enskinment in the first place. Not necessarily forever, but at least to give space.
Would you call it, from where you sit, would you call it a lack of intelligence? Maybe at the point when knowledge was, revealed to government's end, this had already, the action had already started taking place. Don't you forget that a lot of the talk about it only started on social media and the rest when pictures were circulated of what was going on. So would it be a lack of intelligence?
I would call it intelligence failure. Look, if you saw, in fact, I'm still looking at the pictures, all of us are looking at the pictures. The princes and the royals and the general public who have assembled or who had assembled at Nalerigu were invited. So definitely there were conversations about this event which took place yesterday. If the government did not have its ears on the ground, as we say literally in Akan, that is an intelligence failure. You could, which I don't want to do, you could also, use conspiracy theory to suggest that the government just pretended to, that it was doing something without necessarily being committed to that. It cannot be that the state of Ghana didn't know that this enskinment, especially when you couple that with the status of the conflict in Bawku. So that was not enough. Now, how the same government now is going to swiftly and in accordance with the law, reverse this situation is going to be very, very difficult. we should expect more violence. Because the youth who have spoken, the youth that you are seeing, the Mamprusi youth, are bent on ensuring that this newly enskinned Naba, stays on the skin. I imagine the day when he arrives in Bawku, whether in Bawku East or Bawku West or wherever he is in Bawku, this conflict is going to get messier.
Just hold for me, Colonel Festus Abwaje, retired. Let me bring in Mahama Ayariga, the Member of Parliament for Bawku Central. Thank you, sir, for joining the conversation.
Thank you, and good morning to you and your viewers and listeners.
It's gone on for donkey years, decades, in fact, this conflict, like I enumerated, mostly based on allodial land titles, rights to them, and chieftaincy, which from time to time crops up and creates quite a situation. But Colonel Festus Abwaje just made a comment about the NDC and the MPP and how both parties have fed into the conflict. He says the Kusasis tend to be pro-NDC, the Mamprusis pro-MPP, and this shows when either administration is in power. What's your reaction to that, even before we get into the substantive issue?
Well, I mean, his account is largely accurate and reflects the history of the problem in the area. It really boils down to the majority Kusasi, who are also landowners of the place, wanting self-rule, to rule themselves because it is their land, and they will do anything to assert Kusasi authority in that area. That is what it has really been. And I would have thought that the government of the day, starting from the NDC to President Kufuor and now President Akufo-Addo, should realize that it is impossible in this day and age to support a minority hegemony over an entire area spanning all that space from Timpani to Pusga to Garu to Binduri to Zebila and then Bawku itself. And so that for me is the practical reality which I expect every government to come to terms with. It is the reality that was recognized by the colonial government just before they left, and that is why the Lord Listowel commission came to that conclusion and asserted Kusasi rule over the area. It was a practical reality that ex-President Rawlings and the PNDC decided that it should reflect on the ground. And I think there is a practical reality that I believe our Supreme Court implicitly recognized by ruling in the 2003 case that nobody should come back to that court with this matter again. And I thought that my uncles, the Mamprushis, and indeed the Nairi, who I believe his own kingdom would have been the subject of the hegemony of some superior authority at some point in history or the other, but who today enjoys self-rule and autonomy. So I would have thought that even he, my grandfather, the Nairi, would realize the practical constraint of insisting on maintaining his hegemony over the Kusasi area. So basically, this is what it is about. No matter how you look at the history and etc., it is about Kusasi self-rule. And the practical reality in this day and age is that you cannot impose yourself on a majority in their own land, and nobody will accept it, nobody will live with that. I straddle the two ethnic groups. I share their blood. But I have to be frank and true to history and the realities of today. Now, to what happened at the Nairi Palace, that is most unfortunate. I didn't expect my grandfather to yield to that pressure. He's held the line for a very long time. At this age, I don't know if he's able to entirely control the environment around him.
So are you suggesting that one, he erred, and that two, maybe age may be catching up with him, so he is liable to certain mistakes that in a more youthful era he wouldn't have made?
Well, I think age would tell on a person at such an advanced age, and he could be easily subject to the manipulation of his elders and people at his palace, and he's easily susceptible to pressure.
Is that what you think happened? Is that what you think happened? Is that what you think happened?
Well, I'm just saying that could easily have happened. But then whatever happened is clearly illegal, even by the government's own statement, that it is illegal. I've consistently said that it won't be legal to do anything like that. And also, it will practically be impossible to enforce. And the government statement is clear about the matter. What I would say for now is that the government must back its words with action. I mean, the statement that government does not recognize what happened as legal. The regional and national houses of chiefs definitely will not recognize what happened. The Supreme Court already has indicated that this matter should not be brought to it. So it is reduced to a simple question of law enforcement, and the president has directed that those who perpetrated the act, the police should go after them and arrest them. And so everybody is just watching to see whether the government is true to its words and whether law enforcement will take the appropriate action. Like
just a quick bit. You've mentioned this bit about a Supreme Court ruling twice now. What exactly is the context in which you bring in the Supreme Court ruling? Which specific angle? Because there is no delineation that specifically says maybe a Kusasi should be at post or a Mamprisi. So what is your angling as far as the ruling is concerned?
I mean, the ruling was a very simple ruling. It basically had to do with Mamprishis coming to the court to try and then make a claim before the court that they were the rightful people entitled to be chiefs. They submitted their statement of case. The Kusasi side also responded and filed their statement of case. And on the date set for hearing, the Mamprishis came to court and decided to withdraw. And the court said, if you withdraw, you should never come back to this court again on this same matter. And they said yes, they were ready to withdraw. So the court gave a ruling that, okay, we'll grant your application for leave to withdraw, subject to you never coming to this court again on this matter. So the doors of the Supreme Court, the doors are closed to them in respect of this particular matter. So I think that one would have expected that the matter is sealed, because really the only place where you could overturn this legally is at the Supreme Court. Don't forget that the Constitution is cast in stone on this matter, and so the only place that was available as an opening was the Supreme Court, which they went to, and they had the opportunity to make their case, and then to have the ruling based on a thorough argument. But then also, I always tell people that if you understand how the Supreme Court works, you will see that when you go to court, you submit your statement of case. That contains your argument. And then your opponent also submits their response to your statement of case, which also contains their argument. So on the date of hearing, the Supreme Court is already seized with all your arguments and the law and everything. So it is only legal illiteracy that will inform the position that, oh, the substantive matter was not heard in the court.
You're also aware, Mahama Ayariga, that the Supreme Court is clothed with the power of judicial review, and that while it may have shut the door on that initial approach by the Mampusis, I mean, since there is no conclusion to this matter, who knows what the apex court in the future could do? That is an outlet, isn't it? Especially as these currents, just hold on, especially as these currents still keep flowing through the system, and we have what we have. Obviously, there must be some avenue in the future for some resolution. The president cannot solve it. No president has been able to do that. The National House of Chiefs has not been able to do that. How do you suggest we bring some finality to this matter without, the court system?
Well, I mean, there must be an end to litigation. And I assume that the Supreme Court sought to bring an end to the litigation of this matter. In any case, I think over the years, since 1993, all sides have been encouraged to resolve the matter using the judicial processes.
Right.
Indeed, I think in 2003, that was the admonition of former President Kufuor. He urged them to go to the court. Indeed, even this President Nana Akufo-Addo, I recall, told them that so far as he is concerned, the matter was resolved by the Supreme Court, and the Nairi, issued a statement saying that the matter wasn't resolved. And so the president encouraged them, well, the matter is not resolved, then go back to that court. But, they've chosen not to go back to that court. So that should tell you that their own lack of confidence in the court as a place to go, because, the language of the court was very, very clear. And I believe that the court sought to give finality to this matter. So when you talk about how to resolve this issue, it's been reduced to a simple question of law enforcement. And I'm sure what the president, through his Minister of Information, put out yesterday, clearly resolved the issue if the president indeed backs his statements with action, which is to say, well, this matter was resolved, this is the law, this person is at the Regional House of Chiefs, he's at the National House of Chiefs, the Constitution protects that status, the Supreme Court protects that status. I treat it as a simple criminal matter, and I've asked the police to go after those who commit a crime and then deal with it. So the president has stated how the matter should be resolved. And so people are just sitting and watching to see if the president will walk the talk.
Before I go back to Colonel Festus Abwaji, I'd just like to find out from you. Colonel spoke about the fact that this was an intelligence failure, and that, information should have been picked on the ground about this incident. I'll ask you, should this enskinment have been allowed to happen in the first place?
Well, anybody who knows the situation in Bawku, right from my own grandfather, the Nairi, to my uncles who went to request to be enskinned, and to the elders at the palace who would have definitely organized and ensured the event. And of course, to the policing authorities in the Nairobi district, to the regional minister, to the Ghana Armed Forces. If they say this is an intelligence failure, then perhaps we should all be packing our bags and crossing over to Togo or La Côte d'Ivoire, because such a significant matter to have escaped our intelligence agencies and to have eluded the enforcement capacity of our law enforcement agencies just depicts an image of a totally failed state, a totally failed law enforcement system, a totally failed, intelligence apparatus. And we should all be afraid for our lives.
We should all be afraid for our lives. You're basically saying that this was such a gargantuan intelligence failure that we should all be afraid for our lives. Is that what you're saying?
If it was an intelligence failure, if it was...
But obviously that is what you're suggesting, because they didn't pick the hint early. We saw details on social media, and then there was a statement from government's end. So obviously you're saying this was an egregious intelligence failure, and that we should all be afraid.
He didn't just say that. He painted two scenarios. He painted the scenario of a conspiracy theory possibility that government might have known this because the people who did this are perceived to be NPP aligned, and the government is sympathetic to their cause, possibly. So there is the conspiracy theory that says, look, they may have had a hand in this because this is too big to escape the eyes of our law enforcement agencies. And then he paints a second image that if indeed it was something that happened on the blind side of government, then it constitutes an intelligence failure of a proportion that, for me, I don't think is possible.
Do hold for me, Mahama Yariga. Let me bring in Colonel Abwaje. So looking at the response of government, it was pretty speedy, but was it apt in terms of what it said, in terms of its scope, in terms of its firmness? And I would like to draw your attention to some of those we spoke to. In fact, one of the gentlemen who interacted with us suggested that this was the best thing that could happen to Bawku, and that it had been a long time coming. In fact, that it had delayed in coming. Some obviously are happy with the enskinment of this new chief. What is your reaction to that? How could this further exacerbate the tensions that we've seen in Bawku?
Well, the tensions have already been exacerbated. But now the battle lines are drawn clearly up to the level of the king, that the Mambrusis are vowed that they are going to, if I should use the word, retake, the skin that since 1984 has been occupied in their eyes wrongfully or unfairly by a Kusasi. Now, the Kusasis are looking at all of this that is happening, and they definitely are likely to say that, yes, the government is behind these happenings. The decisive battle will occur when this newly enskinned Bawku Naba, returns or arrives in Bawku. That is going to be a scenario that I think we should not contemplate. But of course, we know that Bawku is under curfew, and that into the foreseeable future, it is not going to be possible for him to enter with this retinue or entourage, to do another celebration in Bawku. Now, I've had occasion to...
You fear chaos would ensue?
Obviously, because the youth who are present or who were present at the Enskinment are youth who are dedicated culturally to their cultural values. You see, and that is what, in fact, in a classical sense, this is a protracted social conflict. It goes back, or it can go back, to the time when the Mole Dagbanis arrived in that part of Ghana, the Dagbon area, the Mamprusi area, and so on, and gradually attempted to establish their sovereignty or overlordship over the autochthons. You see, since then, these tensions have been there in one form or the other. Look, they have a word that they call the Tindanama or Tindana. Like Accra here, you have the Ulomo. The Ulomo traditionally are the only priests who can appease the land. They were here before the Ga Adangbe arrived. So the Ga-Dangbe have assimilated that culture and allowed the priesthood, clan, if I should call them that way, to continue whilst they rule over them politically. Now that kind of assimilation, if I should say, was not possible between the Mamprusis and the Kusasis, between the Mamprusis, the Bises, the Moshis, and so on and so forth. So anytime this conflict erupts or escalates, it is a revision of the tensions that have persisted since the arrival of everybody into that part of the land. In this modern context, our best recourse is to the rule of law. Unfortunately, even if the British manipulated the system to create the Bawku Naba and head of Kusasis, assuming that that is the case, even if under Kwame Nkrumah, the system was also politically exploited to put a Kusasi on the skin, even if the NLC, also interfered with the system, annulling the decisions of that commission, and even if the PNDC also politicized the situation, we all agreed in 1992, per the constitution that took effect in 1993, that politics will not play a role in anything that we call chieftaincy or chiefship or skinment or whatever it is. So our best recourse is to the rule of law. And we have a precedent. The precedent being in 2003, when the Supreme Court pronounced itself on this conflict and who occupies the skin and who does not occupy the skin. So if anybody has any grievance with the decisions of the Supreme Court or the interpretation thereof, the best recourse is back to the court. However, we are in a modern context. We have institutions for mediation, conciliation, and so on. So in the history of this conflict, institutions like WANEP, for instance, have played a very critical role. Currently, we have this constitutional provision for the National Peace Council, which has also been active or actively involved in this conflict. They are all there. We have the precedence of how we resolve the Yendi crisis. So all is not lost. We must, and we should have, before yesterday, use some of these mechanisms to try and deal with the protracted nature of this conflict. Now we've brought it to a head, and we are talking about the use of force or law enforcement. I have had occasion to say that in inter-ethnic disputes, force is not the best, mechanism to resolve the issue. So yes, let the security forces, the law enforcement agencies, ensure that there is law and order in Bawku and its environs, but at the same time, and more importantly, the government must be seen to be deploying other mechanisms to bring about conciliation or reconciliation in this matter. Now, how it's going to be resolved, I don't know the technicalities, but now you have two centers of traditional authority. Who is going to lead? The one who was installed in 1984 or the one who was installed 15 February 2023? That's a very daunting task.
And I was about to come to exactly that, because now you have Naba Azoka, who has been duly gazetted in the National House of Chiefs, in the region's House of Chiefs as well. And you have the new Naba who, just to quote from government statement from the Information Ministry, further, any developments that have the potential to undermine the peace of Bawku will also be dealt with swiftly and in accordance with the law. How, Colonel, do you see this playing out? Because like you said, if the newly installed chief with his retinue make an entrance, that could spell chaos. How do you foresee this playing out in any practical solution to the issue?
Well, in practice, we need to make reference to May 2022. The Upper East Regional House of Chiefs stated in very clear terms, that's the language that I picked from the source, that the incumbent Naba Asigri Abugrago Azoka II is the legitimate chief of Bawku by the Upper East Regional House of Chiefs. What is likely to happen is that the Upper East Regional House of Chiefs cannot and will not admit the newly enskinned Naba into their councils, into their chamber. If they don't do that, the National House of Chiefs cannot also approve of the enskinment. So it's going to be an enskinment only in name, but nevertheless, the fact of the matter that there is another Naba is going to create tensions. So I've tried in my layman's words, because I'm not an expert, but I don't know the law, that the best course of action must be conciliation, bringing the parties around the table, even if this thing has happened, and getting them to talk among themselves to find an amicable solution. That is, for now, to ensure that tensions don't keep escalating. And yesterday I mentioned somewhere that this timing is very worrisome to me, because we are in the process of going to elections. And if this conflict now draws on and on and on, one day there's going to be a declaration that in view of or in light of the conflict, elections will not take place in a certain part of this country, which will be unfortunate. So the earlier we mobilized other resources, and we have the resources, this is not a matter that requires any external party, Norwegians or Finns or whatever, to come. This is a matter that can be resolved because we've resolved the Yendi crisis, at least into the foreseeable future.
Right.
But in the long term, we need to go back and look at the root causes of this conflict. And all the elements that you mentioned, who rules over which people, who owns the land, who appeases the land, and all of these come with benefits, the benefits being socio-economic. So the socio-economic aspects of trade and business and so on are part of it. Right. Socio-economic development, even if you don't have land. Like me sitting here, I'm a royal, but I don't have land. Not even 1 meter of land I don't have. But I'm successful. Why? Because I went to school and I joined a profession that benefited me. So yes, people may not, all the Kusasis and Mamprusis and Bisas and Bimobes may not have access to the land, but the state could capacitate them in other ways. And many of the respondents, including the Honorable who has spoken now, many people from many parts of this country, including the northern parts, are very grateful that because of education, now they are who they are. Right. So there are other investments that we could make in that part of Bawku in the long term to ensure that we move the mindset of the people away from parcels of land and so on and so forth. But nevertheless, this tradition. Right. And people will root for their traditions. There must be rule of law. I would have wished that the government preempted this. And I said yesterday, prevention is better than the cure. If we had stopped the enskinment, not yesterday, but the week or the month before, we would not have been having this conversation.
I'll get Mahama Yariga back. I hear his connection just failed us, so I'll get back to him. But two critical issues I want us to discuss. For you, I want us to contemplate how this feeds into the terrorist threat. We've been surrounded by scenes of violence from Burkina Faso, Mali, practically all around us. And we've been told that the terrorist threat is real and that it is in some respect here already. We all know that as far as terrorism is concerned, these terrorists also have places where they find respite, places where maybe they can grab resources, like with the Galamsey incidents, and so they may not necessarily attack. Looking at the strategic positioning of Bawku and looking at infiltration, our borders are so porous. How could this feed into escalating Ghana's exposure to terrorism ahead of 2024?
Let me use a brief context. Yesterday, I put something on Facebook.
Kano, just do me, please oblige me. Mahama Yariga has to take leave of us. So let me just swing this question to him, and then I'll come back to you on that point.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. Mahama Ayariga, thank you for staying with us. I just want to find out from you. We've heard from the Zebela MP, Cletus Avoka, just quoting his words. He says, such purported enskinment is now and void. You were among the members of parliament who joined him to express these thoughts. But what can be done, as my final question to you, what can be done from Parliament's end in aiding the executive to resolve this matter? What are your expectations moving forward?
Parliament has absolutely no role. So Parliament should not be expected to do anything. I think
no, but Parliament has come out to make a statement. I know the executive will have to resolve the matter. The executive has the powers, but what will you do from Parliament's end?
Parliament has not made any statement. Individual members of Parliament representing the constituencies in the area have made a statement. That's not a statement of Parliament.
True.
Parliament is incapable of making any statement. Unless maybe Parliament doesn't even have the legal capacity.
So I was just referencing what you, the members of Parliament, made, but pardon my clothing it in a blanket and saying Parliament. But I'm asking, so what are your expectations moving forward?
Well, I mean, our expectations, as you will see in the statement, is that the President will walk the talk. He himself recognizes that what happened is an illegality. He's referred the matter to the police to deal with, which presupposes that he himself accepts that it is a criminal conduct which falls within the purview of the police services. And so I think that basically everybody is just watching the government and what the government will do.
What can you expect? Yes, government has issued its statement. In the next, I mean, people have said that this could quickly degenerate into something we don't want to see. Let's say in the next week, in the next month, what would you want to see from government's end to de-escalate the situation? Just finally, before you leave us.
Government has to do what it has said. Government has said that the act is criminal. Government has said that it doesn't recognize the act. Government has said that nobody can hold himself out as chief of Bawku other than Abugrago Azoka II. Government has said that the police should look out for anybody who carries himself about as a chief of Bawku other than Abugrago Azoka II, and that the police should arrest such a person. So government has said everything, and so everybody in Bawku is sitting quietly and watching government. I can assure you that since yesterday, my colleagues and I have done everything to maintain peace in the area. We've spoken severally. If you will notice, there's been no gunshot in Bawku since the event yesterday, thanks to the effort of the Bawku Naba himself, his elders, some of us, the MPs, talking to our people and pleading with them and asking them to just sit and watch government enforce its laws and not take the law into their own hands. And so everybody is sitting and watching the government to see whether it will walk the talk. And if it doesn't walk the talk, then I can assure you that at a certain point, those of us holding the line might lose control. We don't want to lose control. We will continue to hold the line and plead with everybody to sit back and watch the government.
When you say you might lose control, what do you mean?
It's happened before. If you followed events, about a year or two ago, when this thing started, it started with a decision to celebrate the funeral of the last person who was exiled when the PNDC passed Law 75, restoring the Kusasis as chiefs. And there was resistance by the Kusasis that this should not happen. The government actually went to court and then got an injunction to restrain the celebrants of the funeral and actually served it on them. And then they defied the court order and injunction and went ahead and then celebrated the funeral. And then, people who arranged and executed the funeral were arrested. And then the other side waited and watched to see whether government would enforce its own injunction that it had gone to court to obtain.
Right.
And one government did not. And then those people were released. The day they were released, my brother, heaven broke loose in Bawku. And that is the firing that has continued up to date. I can tell you, that is the firing that has continued up to date. So
Okay.
This time again, I can assure you that we are pleading with them, we are begging them to hold their fire, not to engage in any violent conduct, and just watch the government, because government has issued a statement. Government has taken their side, which is the side of the law, and said, look, you are the chief. We recognize you, the regional head of chief recognizes you, national head of chief recognizes you. What happened was an illegality. We would not recognize this person. Indeed, the conduct was criminal, and we have directed our police service to arrest all those who carry themselves about,
Right.
a rival chief. So they are watching the government, basically. I mean, you don't expect anybody like me to do any better, which is to plead with people, to please, calm down, just watch government. They will take action.
Okay.
So if you take action as a state, then you restrain people from wanting to take action themselves. And I think that is why we are waiting patiently to see what government will do. What will be the next step beyond just a statement?
All right. Thank you so much, Mahama Yariga, for having joined us, for having reconnected with us, especially when the connection dropped. Mahama Yariga is Member of Parliament for Bawku Central. Before you come in, Colonel Abuaji, I just want you to take stock of this so that if you have any reaction to that, you can add that to your talk about the terrorist threat. We're joined by Albert Sori, our regional correspondent. Albert, a very good morning to you. Thank you for joining us. What is the latest in the Bawku area on the back of this development?
Everything is still normal in Bawku. Yesterday, after the Enskinment, the fears were that it could escalate the situation. But this morning, my checks show that there were no disturbances, there were no shootings whatsoever in the township. And this morning, activity, economic and other life activities have continued the normal way. What we do not know is whether the chief who was enskined yesterday has returned to the town. My checks so far this morning haven't yielded any results as to whether he was brought into the township or not. So we do not know, we do not have any confirmation of his return to the town at the moment. But many people in the town are a bit scared of what could happen should he be brought into the township. Many are anticipating that it could escalate the situation. And so even though activity and other things are going on the normal way in the township, it is with some bated breath for many people who are afraid that something bad will happen. But we're told that there's a lot of security presence on the.
Well, Albert, sorry there, our regional correspondent. We'll just try to work it back. There's a bit of interference there. We'll try to work on the connection so that we can hear better what it is he has to say. But if you've joined the conversation, it has everything to do with the latest as far as Bawku is concerned. Naba Azoka being, given reinforcement from government's end, basically the point being made that he is the Naba, contrary to what has happened with the enskinment of a new Bawku Naba, which government has termed as illegal. And that is the latest development there. I've been engaging Mahama Yariga, Member of Parliament for Bawku Central, who has been espousing some thoughts. But we also have Colonel Festus Abwaja, retired, on the line, who will be giving his final thoughts. I just want us to reconnect to Albert Sorry so he can wrap quickly on what the current state is in Bawku, and then hopefully if the connection is better, we can proceed from there. Albert, if you can hear me, just wrap with your comments. You were making the point that you cannot determine whether the newly enskinned Naba has been brought back into town. Hello, Albert, sorry.
Open.
Yes, you were making a point. Please conclude.
Yes, so I was saying that we do not know for now if the new chief has been brought into the town, but many people are worried that it could escalate the situation this morning. Activity for most people is normal. Everybody's going about their normal everyday activity. But because of the enskinment yesterday, people are a bit worried that we could witness some disturbances. So that is the situation at the moment, but we know that security are also on the ground. From Monday, as we are told, the number of security personnel in Bawku were increased, and many more of them are visibly seen on the ground. So that is the situation this morning.
Thank you so much, Albert Sorry, our regional correspondent, bringing us the scoop on that development in Bawku. Back to you, Colonel Abwaja, for your final comments. I raised the bit about the terrorist threat and how these incidents could feed into that. And you could add any thoughts about what our correspondent has added as well. Over to you, sir. Hello?
Yeah, in terms of the terrorism dimension, I think for quite a long time, many people, including the government, have been aware that the proximity of the Bawku conflict to the instability in Burkina Faso is one that we need to be very, very mindful of. The fact is very simple, and I was going to use the Malian context to try and explain what I mean. Mali had its own inter-ethnic rivalries long before 2012 between the Tuaregs and, if you like, the Bambaras. Mali gained independence. The state was aware that there were some provisions for autonomy for the Tuaregs, which never happened until Gaddafi's Libya imploded. The Tuaregs, who had been recruited as the guard regiment for Gaddafi, now returned. But they did not return empty-handed. They returned with weapons and ammunition, and then declared their independent state of Azawad. As if that was not enough, then the international or global terrorists followed up. And that is where Mali is now. It is the epicenter of terrorism, not only in West Africa, but in Africa. And then from there, terrorism has spilled over into Burkina Faso, into Niger. It started gradually from the northern borders of these countries, started, spilling down. Now, as historians say, it is echoing off our northern borders. So, any of the parties involved in the Bawku dispute or conflict can go and seek alliances from across the border. Indeed, there is research literature which shows that terrorists are already here in the form of the mining activities going on, in the form of cattle that is stolen by terrorists and then sold in Ghana. For all you know, the beef that we are eating in Accra may be coming from cattle that has been stolen by terrorists and sold in northern parts of Ghana and then arriving in Accra.
Cattle rustling.
So we need to be very, very careful that the terrorists themselves do not come to offer their services to any of these parties, or if you like, both of the parties. So that is not a good sign for Ghana's stability. And we need to be very, very careful. And that is why I think that the government should have been a bit more proactive.
When you use the word proactive, pardon my interjection, when you use the word proactive, are you saying that by not dealing decisively, or if you like, incisively with this situation, we're basically playing into the hands of terrorists?
Because when the conflict festers...
Do confirm for me, is that what you're saying?
No, let me try and explain, because it's very dangerous for me to use your words. There's this element we call mobilization. How did the people feuding in Bawku, how did they come across the weapons? And I've been told by a senior officer that there are machine guns that are being deployed, not by the Ghana Armed Forces, but by the let me say, the Kusasis and the Mamprusis and so on. Where did these weapons come from? And the ammunition. Already we know that the fertilizer that is smuggled from Ghana, in all likelihood, end up with the terrorists to make explosive devices. So all the ingredients are already present in Ghana and probably in the Bawku enclave. And it's going to take just a spark, and then it moves on from this threshold of an interethnic dispute to one that involves terrorists. It could take many different formulations, but that possibility remains that the Bawku conflict can be exploited by the terrorists, or the parties to the conflict can themselves exploit advantages through alliances with individual terrorists or groups of terrorists.
Colonel, thank you so much for these reactions. Very, very deep reflections you've shared about the cracks in Bawku. It is our hope, all of us, that more lasting peace can be restored and that we can avert any negative, any consequences, so to speak. But we're grateful for your time, Colonel Festus Abwaje, retired, of course. And all of these gentlemen have joined the conversation. Mahama Yariga, MP Bawku Central, and Colonel Festus Abwaje, retired, a conflict and security analyst. We also had Albesori, our regional correspondent. Before we take a breather and continue with the show, are you looking for a job in the world of technology? Are you looking for a platform that equips you to land your dream job in technology? Then the 2023 edition of the Tech Job Fair is just right for you. The venue is the Accra International Conference Center. The date is Wednesday, February 22, 2023, time 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. The theme is leveraging technology to create inclusive and sustainable jobs. Organizers, Institute of ICT Professionals at Ghana and AFOS Foundation. Supporters or exhibitors include the German Development Corporation under the Invest for Jobs program, Jobberman, Lene Services, MTN, GIZ, AHK, Netherlands Trust Fund, Admin Telecom, among others. If you want any further information, call or WhatsApp them on 0242 912 027 or 0201 233 215. The job fair is free and open to all. Do stay with us. When we return, there is more on the AM show. We'll be talking about the Consumer Price Index, the latest dynamics, and more. We'll be right back.